Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Parenting is Easy, said no one ever. I have a guest that I'm very excited about today with us, Lainie Liberti, who has been an author of a book that I will be recommending not just during our interview, but even in sessions and podcast interviews where we're not talking to her, I will still recommend her book. And just a little bit about Lainie, and then we'll let her talk and get right into a story and how she can be a benefit to us here on this podcast. She is a renowned author, speaker, community leader, and advocate for alternative education. She is considered a pioneer in the world of schooling movement and founded the Transformative Mentoring for Teens in 2020 and to help support mental health for adolescents, which obviously is something that we need more in this world and something that we're very passionate about here on this podcast. In 2020, she released her first book, Seen, Heard, and Understood, which quickly became a bestseller in the parenting and new releases category on Amazon. There are so many more things that I want to say about Lainie and who she is and where she's coming from starting workshops and being around the world teaching teens and adolescents. I think it was over 20 locations, if I remember correctly, that you've been in. But without further ado, and just to tell her a little bit about herself, Lainie Liberti, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you so much for the invitation. It is such an honor to be here on your new project.
Thank you so much. So there are so many different places to start, but I want to go right into the book, and then we go into some things as well. What was your inspiration for this book? I think the title is awesome, and where have you drawn inspiration for this book in itself?
Yikes, that is such a loaded question. I guess I'm going to just have to give you a little bit of background so you've
Please.
got a better understanding of where I come from and why I do the work that I do. I am a parent, as you said, and I usually start my story with 2008. I'm from California, from Los Angeles. We experienced an economy crash, and that's when I really decided to make a change in my life. I worked in advertising and branding for almost 20 years. I owned my own agency for the last 8 of those years. And when the economy crash happened, I knew I'd be closing my agency. Now, the other thing that happened concurrently is obviously I'm a parent, and I was a single parent for all of my son's childhood, for all of his life. And
how old is he now?
He now is 24, but at the time he was 9.
Right.
And one of the things he used to say to me all the time was, "Mom, you're always working. You never spend any time with me." And that was indeed the truth. And that just sort of ripped through my heart. And, as a parent, that's like the hardest thing just to hear. And especially when the idea of all the work that I was doing was so I could provide for the family, and that I was in conflict with, the so-called American dream, work hard, get ahead, provide for your family. But yet I was sacrificing the very thing that was most important to me, which was my family.
And that you were working for. Exactly.
Exactly. And so since I knew that I wouldn't be bringing back my staff at the end of the year in 2008, 2009 was kind of open. And I said to my son, his name is Miro, I said to him one night late in the office, I said, "What do you think if we just get rid of all of this stuff and we just go have an adventure for a year?" And I remember he was sitting on the computer. He turned around, he stopped, he looked at me. He's like, "Seriously?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "One question first." I said, "What?" He said, "Do I have to go to school?" I said, no, that's okay. We'll take a year to travel." And intuitively, I knew that a year of travel, he'd learn way more than 5th grade could ever offer. And so with that, we were off. And that was 2009. And we had a plan to leave California, head south, start in Mexico.
Any prep, anything that you guys prepared beforehand, or was it just like, let's wing it?
Well, yes. And I'm going to talk about that. We did prep. We didn't prep in the way that you're probably asking. We knew that we were just going to head south, but we prepped in terms of our family culture. We wanted to, number one, do everything that we did in partnership. This was going to be our trip, and this was really special. in terms of,
Mm.
this is the thing that he was always asking, spending time with him, spending time with him. And now I was going to spend time.
Collaborative parenting?
Collaborative parenting. I actually call it partnership parenting, but it
Partnership
is
parenting.
indeed
Okay.
collaborative parenting. I am somebody who uh, I self-identify as an autodidactic, a self-directed learner, a lifelong learner, and so every book I could get my hands on in terms of parenting, I did. I read every book on attachment parenting. I read every book that I could on conscious parenting, on gentle parenting, hand in hand parenting, peaceful parenting, everything that I could
Mm.
understand about parenting, I did. And so a lot of those modalities were in alignment with what I was seeking, but didn't have the time to actually set out and do it. But this gave us the opportunity to really be present. So I took the best of all of those different modalities of parenting, and we called it partnership parenting, which indeed is really collaborative parenting. And the difference between some of these modalities like conscious parenting and gentle parenting and peaceful parenting and so forth is that the parents are still in control. And even though they are dictating how the culture of the family should run, comes from the parent, and it might be an application in a very gentle perspective, it's still a manipulation. It's still parenting with an agenda to change the behavior of the children. And I really wanted to cut through that and be in
Mm.
partnership. So
So what's
immediately,
that balance between, I guess you could say, making sure there is no manipulation, but yet at the same time having that understanding for the child that, hey, I'm still mom and there still are rules and structure for how we go about things. What is that balance and how does that work?
well, we lived without rules, and I'll tell you how we were able to do that. And in partnership, if you think about your partnership with your partners, maybe your wife, your husband, your business partners, anybody who steps into a partnership recognizing that each individual brings a certain skill set, they bring a certain ability, likes, preferences, desires, and so forth, goals. It doesn't mean partnership is equality or the same. So as a partner to my child, I am the custodial parent. I am the person who earns the money. I am the one who's accountable and responsible, but it doesn't mean I'm the
Mm.
authority. It means this is the role that within this partnership I am playing. And decisions that can be made need to be made in the partnership. It doesn't mean I am telling the person I'm in partnership how to live their life. It means we're coming together with the understanding that each one of us plays a different role in the partnership, that
And
this is
respecting the other side.
absolutely. And instead of living with rules, one of the first things that we applied to our family culture before we set out was, how are we going to live our life without rules? And the way that we did that was I come from the world of advertising and branding. And one of the tools that you use when you help create a brand for a company is defining what the core values are of that company, so they know how to craft the communications and so forth, had to be in alignment with the core values. Well, we took that skill that I used to use with my clients and we brought that into our family culture. So we determined, each one of us individually, what our core values were. And then together we had a conversation about what that meant to each one of us. And then together we crafted what our family core values were. So we didn't need rules. All we needed was the awareness of which values we chose to collectively live. And when a decision needed to be made, we had a conversation and ran them through the filter of the core values to see what was in alignment. Because when you live in a family in an authoritarian paradigm, one person or two people have to become the rule maker, the rule enforcer, the rule judge, and then the rule punisher if the rules aren't made. And I didn't want to be any of those things. I wanted to be in pure partnership and understanding that we each had different roles. ROLES sounds very similar to rules. The rules weren't needed, right? So as the person, my role was to keep us safe, to provide the financial, necessity of our family. But in partnership, I trusted him. He had all he had an ATM card, he had the bank access. This was our joint partnership journey. And so living in partnership with somebody is very different than being the authority and
Oh, for
guiding
sure.
or pulling or pushing them in a direction. So our 1 year trip, which started in 2009, well, it hasn't ended yet. He's now 24. Like I said, we decided not to go back after a year, and we continued to travel around the world in partnership as he grew up. And part of being a parent to somebody who is first tween and then stepping into their adolescence as an autodidactic and a motivated self-directed learner, I wanted to learn everything I could about adolescence, about neurobiology, about psychology, about the teen brain, about the history of the role of adolescence. I had to understand all of that in order to be in partnership in a very empowering way.
So I want to go back to what you were saying before regarding uh, the roles in the family. As a teenager, is I guess you could say learning to be on their own, learning this concept of autonomy. Um, and let's say they would stretch the rules. Whether it's sneaking out at night or staying up late at night or bringing someone home or maybe doing some behavior that the parent figure might not necessarily agree with. How does that look regarding the conversations? And is there something along the lines uh, of a reprimand or even consequences when it comes to partnership parenting?
It's a beautiful question. So, when you're living in partnership with somebody, the internal worlds are just as important as the external circumstances. And a good part of my focus parenting my child and what I urge parents to do, and I talk about this a lot in my book, and I provide tools, is tools for self inquiry and really understanding and being accountable for the internal worlds. Now, my son and I have been really connected and bonded because part of our family culture has been about being accountable for our own internal worlds. And I've got tools that we worked through as a family, just as using core values as an instrument or a tool to help us make decisions to remain in alignment with our own values. Not only were we accountable for our triggers, our shadows, our beliefs, all of this stuff became a common part of the conversation. Now, in my circumstance, there was no teen rebellion because there was a culture of trust, real deep trust. And because I wasn't the authority and I didn't punish him, we spoke about natural consequences and I helped him to process the natural consequences as they came up. But the self empowerment piece, the autonomy, the sovereignty, and the agency piece is a massive part of partnership parenting and having safe spaces that we've cultivated, not just because we said this sounds trendy and we're going to make a safe space. We lived these safe spaces where we truly honored what was happening in the internal world. So I was able to reflect back to him when I saw him stumble, here's what I'm observing. Is this true for you? Because my perspective might be you're not trusting yourself, or you're acting out of fear, or you may feel some anxiety about this. Is this true? Can you check in and see if that seems in alignment with what's happening now, without judgment, without punishment? And again, cultivating safe spaces to talk about these internal worlds, that we still do that to this day. He lives in the same town as me here in Mexico.
Right. He's able to see those natural consequences. Now, let's say you have a child that's in this system that is now in, let's call it, the outside world. Right. They're in public school setting where
Yeah.
they might do something with peers that I guess you could say would cause for some punishment to be whatever that situation is. So how does either reprimand or consequences work when there is a society that will sometimes say no, there's a punishment for that. If you're going to skip school or you're going to do something, there's going to be a consequence, there's going to be a detention, there's going to be work that you're going to have to do based off your actions that were done. And how does that line up when society is saying one thing regarding how things work, but then he's going to come home to mom who he feels the love more than anywhere else, and there might be a different type of reaction happen.
Well, I mean, if he's already paying consequences, or living out the consequences of his actions in society, why does that need to
Sure.
be double punished in the home space? To me, it's a matter of being supportive and helping him unpack the consequences as a direct result of his actions, right? A direct result of his decisions. And part of one of the really strong benefits of being raised this way is because I did so much research and deep dives into understanding the teenage or adolescent brain development. And I helped him to understand what
Mm.
was happening in his own biological development, understanding that he doesn't have the natural ability to directly predict what the consequences of his actions were, meaning that the prefrontal cortex is not uh, completely developed in adolescence. We know that from a scientific perspective. So if he understands that, and he did understand that, if he needed help to unpack potential
Mm.
consequences, I'm the safe person to come to help do that before he makes the decision. Now, if he makes a decision and the consequences are some punishment from the outside world, from the system that we all are living in, then it goes to show that this is not punishment from within the family unit. This is what it means to
That's a
be a part
consequence.
of culture and society. And yes, I support you, but next time you have this visceral experience where you
Right.
understand that, and I can remind you, I'm not going to manipulate you, because as an adult, we want to raise, I mean, as parents, we want to raise children that grow into adults that can have agency. But if the only time that they start being sovereign or independent is when they're an adult, they're going to make mistakes. And this may not be a safe environment to make mistakes, because the consequences are much more dire than making a mistake when you're a teen or a child and you have the support.
Wow. Yeah. I okay. I hear that, and I think there's the big thing that I'm hearing from you is the constant dialect, constant communication, and I think that's become a theme. I think on this podcast of communication, and
Yeah.
working to make sure that we are able to not only hear but understand and listen to our kids and our teens, and vice versa, for them to hear us. And sometimes, well, we might speak the same language, but we don't necessarily speak the same language, and knowing how to give that over, I think, is key to any parenting, and especially when we're dealing with kids that are looking for their agency and autonomy, and in their teenage years. So there you are,
Yeah.
after a year, you're like, guys, we're going to continue doing this. So Can you walk us through a little bit of what was that conversation like, and where do you sort of go from there?
Well, it actually, one of the, we set out with these sets of, so I call it our scaffolding. It was the tools that we used in order to make sense of our life, because we were stepping into a brand new way of living together and being together. We were spending time together, where before I was working, he was going to school. We had very minimal time, and he was right. I never spent time, or rarely spent time with him, because I was working. So here we were together. And even though I was still doing a little bit of online work the first year, we were living off of our savings. And because we wanted to live without rules, we set up our scaffolding to know what the core values were, so we can determine whether or not the decisions were in alignment. We were side by side partnership. This was our journey. One of the other things that we decided as a family unit was that we were going to say yes more often. And as long as the yes was in alignment with the values that we were both holding, we would say yes emphatically. We would say yes to anything
Can you
in
give an
life,
example?
even if we hadn't done it. Sure. How about we take this river rafting trip? Yes. Well, is this in alignment? Are we supporting each other? Is it in alignment with our values? Or somebody invited us to dinner and we don't know them? Do we feel trust? Do we feel like this is in alignment? What tools can we use, where before we'd say no, no, no? I said no to him a lot because I didn't have time. Now we were saying a lot more yeses. Like one day we were living in Antigua and he said, Mom, I want to spend the day looking at all of these weird door knockers that we've seen all over the town. Can we walk around town and take pictures of every single door knocker? Yes. No judgment? Yes, let's do it. Yes, it gives us the ability to spend time together. It's something that I would have never thought of. You suggested it. Yes, yes, let's say yes. So saying yes was one of those things that we practiced and laughed about and received joy. And about 8 months into our travels, Miro looked at me and he said, Mom, can we keep doing this forever? What choice did I have?
Yeah, you
I
have to say
had to
yes,
say
exactly.
yes.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say yes. So that's what the 1 year, extending it to about, we're just starting our
Wow.
15th year now. So we've been at this for a long time. I raised him outside of the country. I raised him nomadically. I raised him in partnership, and all of that really led to the creation of the book. The other piece that I haven't told you about yet, which I've written a lot about in my book, is I was raised in a household where it was I had a lot of childhood trauma. There was a lot of emotional abuse, a lot of neglect. And the way that I was raised, I knew straight out of my childhood that I never wanted to raise a child like this, which part of my experience growing up, I had a lot of trauma responses. I had a lot of trauma that I needed to integrate and really
Process
unpack
out.
and
Yeah,
look
sure.
at. And part of my trauma response process was hyper independence, which fueled a lot of the, my autodidactism, my self-directed learning. I wanted to know everything I could know, and nobody could tell me how to learn it or where to learn it. I'm going to figure this stuff out. The hyper independence gave
Had to
me
become
great.
exactly very, very independent. It sounds like you had to become.
However, in many, many instances that played against me, and that was a lot of sort of integration and healing I had to do. But part of that what propelled me into deep dives of self-directed healing. If everybody was like me, we would put you out of business, because we need people like you to support people like me. But I was saying, no, I didn't want somebody to support me. I'm going to do it on my own. And that drove me into deep research. I probably have researched equal to somebody who's getting a doctorate degree. I've read medical journals. I've read every, book that's out of my range of education because I wanted to, and I wanted to self-empower myself, which gave me a lot of resources for self-directed healing. So, I got into CBD and all sorts of, different modalities of healing in order to correct, the trauma, or
that you've
in
been
my
through.
case, to integrate it, unpack it, understand, and learn. Yeah.
So I think the two big things that I'm packing from there, yeah, there are a lot of tools out there. The two things that are standing out to me over here are, first of all, ABC, which is always be curious,
Yeah.
and if there's any sort of change that a person is going to make within others, or with whether it's a child or peers or colleagues, whatever it is, but at first it has to also be internal, and there
Yeah.
have to first go inside. The way I like doing it is saying, like, make a U-turn, like, like an actual U-turn, and bring it back to self. And it's through the work that we can do within ourselves and process that within ourselves, that we're able to then assist others.
Yeah.
And as long as we're staying curious about what that process is like, and there's from the different journals you've read, and studies, and speakers, and probably YouTube clips, and library visits that you've been to, maybe even around the world.
Around the world.
There are so many different things that you can literally learn from. I'm curious, if, like, from what I guess we would call mainstream medias and science that we have, that has for the most part been a very good guidance for us, and when it comes to parenting, have there been certain things, and maybe you've even written about them, that you've picked up that you could say, I wish this was taught more to other people?
Well, part of traveling gave me the like physical awareness that the outer world experience is a reflection of the inner world, and those are that became the theme of our 15 years of traveling together, right? That became the theme. So if something in the inner world was not feeling good, our outer world experience will reflect that. And I think self inquiry is the very first place that we need to go. Getting comfortable with poking around and seeing what's there, and having tools to help guide that kind of self inquiry will help us understand situations, relational situations, systemic situations,
Sure.
cultural situations, and interpersonal situations. It all starts, as you say, the U turn, right?
Right. And is that able to be done in a setting where it's not just one parent and one child, and it's done where it's either part of a
Yeah.
culture or part of larger families? And how would that look?
Yeah. So I talk about partnership parenting. It doesn't, partnership isn't only for parents and children,
Of
regardless
course
of the
not.
family size and the family makeup. Um, just to give you a little bit of understanding, so we talk about partnership parenting. I've worked with families around the world, all different sizes. But as we created the structure of partnership parenting and the foundation, or the scaffolding, as I like to call it, the tools that we use, when my son was 13, together we continued to travel. And one of the things that he started to express was he wanted more community. And as I started
Mm.
to dive deeper into the adolescence experience, yes, community, the individuation, the social learning, all that stuff is what his brain was wired to do. And from a psychological perspective, the individuation is a natural part of it. But when you take a child out of their home community, and now we were a community of two, we really wanted,
Mm.
this was more important for him to be in community. So together we launched Project World School, and that launched over 10 years ago, where we designed a program to take teens around the world to form these temporary learning communities. And so far, we've taken over 200 teens to different places in the world, from Mexico to South Africa, Thailand, Japan, Ecuador, Peru, Wales, Greece, all over the world, for these immersive learning experiences.
Wow, wow. So I just want to, I was stopping on something that you were saying over here. So I think there's so much for us to talk about this, and we're going to get to talking more about what the actual program is about. Okay, so I want to go, continue off what we're just talking about, of you being able to start this school and hearing from your son that he wants to be around others. When you heard that from him, and needing to be around other people, what was that experience like for you personally, and what did you take out of that conversation with your son regarding what it is that he needs?
Well, okay. So it's a great question. I, first of all, wasn't offended at all. I was quite grateful that he was able to come to me and that he was able to freely express in a safe space what was lacking in his life. And part of our family culture was really expressing what our needs are, and putting voice to that, really being accountable and putting words to those things, because here we were in partnership and reliant on each other. And this is, we were relying on each other to come to one another when there were problems. So for me, I looked at it as the next challenge that we were going to overcome together. Creating a Project World School was a wonderful solution. But I don't know if you know, but probably a lot of your listeners will know, if they've started their own business, it does take a while. It takes research, it takes
Mm.
commitment, it takes belief, it takes vision, and it takes perseverance. And all of
And
those
some
things,
failure.
yeah. And all of those things were not part of my son's experience prior to this. So he wasn't quite aware that this was going to take work to do. You can't just,
Mm.
put a sign on your shingle and, say we're open. It takes marketing, it takes
Right.
building relationships and brands and all that stuff, which is what I had experience doing. So his initial reaction was, "This is never going to work, Mom." Just, and I completely understood from his experience, not having anything to relate it to. Yeah, it wasn't going to work, because, well, that was the perspective that he held, which was really valid. And it was safe for me to say, I disagree. I think that we've got something here. And I, for the first almost 2 years, really held the vision. We did one trip the first year. The second year, we did one trip. The third year, we did two trips, and we built it slowly. And I think by being a part of that and being the co-founder, not only, kind of from an outside perspective, we got to live the building of something together. Again, the side by side. And even
Right.
though my role was different than his role, it's what I brought to the table. He brought a fresh set of eyes and curiosity, and the teen insight and the voice of a teen, and all of these things that we really needed, which was equally weighted to build this company. And so I did deep dives into researching everything I could about, I think I told you this, about, nonviolent communication and how to create learning communities. And I spoke and interviewed many professors and many academics who wrote academic papers on the subject, and many different
And you're
people I
being a
believe.
mom while you're doing all this.
All of that,
Right.
yes. But because, again, of my natural curiosity, I'm modeling, not only can we learn anything we want to learn, but I'm not doing it in a pressured way. I'm doing it because I'm excited and my curiosity is
Right.
activated. And these are the kinds of sort of foundational cultural practices that were a big part of our family culture.
So, and this is something that obviously has been a big part of the growth in the relationship that you have with your son. And it
Yeah.
sounds like a lot of the relationship is based on communication, like most relationships are.
Oh my
And he's
gosh.
sharing with you regarding what it is that he wants or what he would like more of, or maybe less of. But mom, what I mean by that is communication is a two-way street, and there are certain frustrations that he can't relate to, whether it's the financial aspect of things or the time and the administrative aspects of what it comes to be running a business and starting a school or anything that has to do with other people that sometimes a child can't relate to. So how does mom, I guess two-part question would be, how does mom relate that to their child? And then how does mom deal with that on her own? Because it's two separate that emotions and frustrations maybe as well that you have to deal with.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say part of the uniqueness of my parenting style has never been to dumb down anything. If Miro asked me a question about governments or economy, I never brought it down, dumbed it down, and believed that he couldn't comprehend an intelligent response that is answering the question that he asked. So, I talked to him about all sorts of things, what it means to build a business, what entrepreneurial skills look like, what the process has been. This was at the time my third business that I started, so I had that background. But more so, yes, communication is key, but it's also not. I didn't assume that he couldn't handle an answer that is based on his inquiry.
Just
I
because he's a
didn't give
kid.
him only just because he's a kid. And that is the act of childism. Like that is the act of thinking that they are less than us. And even though yes, they have less time on the planet, I believe that every human being is born as a whole person, and they will act in the manner that they're treated. So if they're respected and given the honor of an intelligent response, that promotes an intelligent
Sure.
interaction walking through the planet. And not knowing something is just as valid as
Sure.
knowing
And I think
something.
that's a
So
very big part of
that
parenting is sometimes even telling a child, I don't know, or, I have to figure that out or I have to ask. And I think that could be one of the most valuable lessons and answers that we could give our children are saying the words, I don't know. At the same time, when it comes to being a mom and having the responsibilities of being a parent, there are certain things that are, I guess you could say, not age appropriate for how we talk about them. You've talked earlier about how you would talk about different conversations depending on his age, depending on where he's holding in his life, and there are also certain things that are not necessarily appropriate for that age or for that situation. So, how would you go about dealing with that? Whether it's starting the school or other types of conversations that Miro is being very curious about, and rightfully so. And you've set up the room to be a place where he can walk into and ask the questions whenever, which I think is a vital proponent of every parent-child relationship. And there are also certain situations where a child is not age appropriate to be told a certain type of answer. So how do you go about dealing with that?
I never filtered. If he had an inquiry about a certain topic, that means he's interested and it is age appropriate because the person in his age is making that
Mhm.
inquiry. My answers were not self edited because I tried to keep him, away from information. We live in a world, and within this world there are, there is human cruelty, there is violence, there is crime, but there's also beauty and
Sure.
all sorts of wonderful things to look at. And I didn't want to just put my hands over his eyes and say this is not age appropriate. I mean, there obviously are things, like gratuitous sex and things like that that are not appropriate for him to watch. I don't even feel it's appropriate for me to watch. It's just not part of our family culture. And I, as somebody who lived through childhood trauma, I get dysregulated quite easily when I hear yelling or when I see violence. And so part of my own self-care is communicating with my son, honey, I can't see that movie. There's a lot of violence in it, and it totally, triggers me. It
Sure.
dysregulates me. I go into fight or freeze. He knows that. He's quite aware, and that's part of the me that I bring to this relationship is number one, the awareness of my own self-care and what's appropriate for me, not because of my age,
And who
but
you
because
are.
of knowing me and what's, how to communicate those things. I don't think, I mean, yeah, I mean, my son wouldn't inquire about something he wasn't ready to know. If most of the topics surrounding sex and just drugs and substances and violence and war and things like that, his have piqued his interest at the most appropriate age appropriate time. I didn't force a conversation about any of
Mm.
those topics down his throat at any point. He came to me and said, okay, what
Right.
does this mean?
Okay.
What
I
is
hear that. And
this?
I think while maybe other people might have different approaches for going about doing it, but I think when you have that open relationship in a way where it's collaborative and it's working together, is there a time and a place where it can say, that's a great question. I'm going to answer the best as I can. And you'll also get more of an answer as you get older. Is there a place for that in this partnership parenting?
I've never used those words, um, but I haven't been faced with something
Okay.
that I felt like I've ever had to. We've always had a very open conversation. Here's an example. My son was 10, and we were in Nicaragua, and we were exploring the culture around us, and that brought us to really digging into the Sandinistas and the whole political movement around that period. And I said to him, I read a book a couple of years ago that was really fascinating about the US government's involvement in this whole period. It was called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. I bet I could find it on audio. Would you like to listen to it together? And I told him a little bit about it. And he said, yeah, that's really
We're
fascinating because
experiencing.
here we are in Nicaragua. We are Americans. And this really brought into context some of that information. And I remember listening to this book with him, and we'd pause and we'd unpack it and we'd talk about all the things. But he was quite involved in everything that we were listening to
Mm.
because we were learning also in context. And I never said, I'm going to, kind of block you from learning about American government or politics or what the
Sure.
world can look like through some of these lenses, because I don't think I want to make the world safe for you. And that's valid. I get that. Parents want to make the world a safe place, but I don't believe that covering up their eyes from certain realities makes it safe. In fact, I think it makes it more dangerous because they're not exposed to the realities, nor do they feel like they have a safe space to unpack
So
the stuff.
one thing that you talked about there regarding doing the audiobook with him and then processing it out, stopping. So there's an author, Adam Alter, who's a professor. I think it's in NYU or Columbia. I think it's in NYU. He wrote a book called Irresistible on the concepts of electronics and how they've been taking over families and our social lives. One of the studies that he brings in there talks about if a child watches together with their parent. It could be anything from Dora the Explorer to a documentary or even a sports game. And when you sit and you watch together with your child and you stop and you pause and you say, you heard that comment, you see that play, you see that thing, and you're able to process it out with the child. And then you go back to watching it. The retention
Yeah.
of that lesson is by far so much more internalized and for the long term, as opposed to giving a child a tablet and saying, here, I need a half hour, so go watch something. And the information and the good information that they might get from that same show, from the same from Dora Explorer or from something else. And I think when I'm hearing you talk about that concept of processing it together with him and seeing how well he was able to internalize it. That goes so far, I think, for all parents that are listening to this, of being able to process things out together with our kids. And to your point of sheltering a child in a certain way, I think every parent has a right to do how they seem fit for whatever situation they're going about doing it. um, and I think for certain ages there could be certain things that the way we would talk about whether it's violence or discrimination might be different for a 5-year-old as opposed to a 10-year-old or a teenager. And I think a parent has to know how to sort of gauge that curiosity level of a child and answer the question that is being asked to them, as opposed to thinking of it in a way where, okay, so
Yes.
now you're talking about race, so now let's talk about slavery and let's talk about oppression to a 4 or 5-year-old. Not that those things shouldn't be talked about, but it's about how we're talking to them, which I think is the main thing that you're saying over here. Um, I'm just curious, when you talk about for yourself and how you have to make sure that you're listening to what he's asking and answering accordingly. There's also, you've talked a little bit about things that you've been through in your life, and a lot of who we are as parents is greatly connected to the upbringing that we have. And there, it sounds like there were, you've talked about how there were many things how you didn't want to be as a parent based on how you were parented. And I'm curious, what's that line? How do you balance your past, but yet also try to have a certain clear set of glasses going forward when you're going about your parenting?
Yeah, it's a really important question.
Mm,
We have to make peace with our own past in order not to play the story over again. And I'm really a big proponent of stopping generational trauma. And I think it ends, in my case, with my generation. And part of that is bringing that trauma and those experiences out of the shadows and looking at the shame that we have surrounding these beliefs or experiences, right? The traumatic experiences from our upbringing. And instead of using our shame to hide it and keep it shoved down, we need to bring it into the light and really process it. And there's a whole methodology to integrating traumas. And I'm sure you know
sure.
this, of
And
course.
how have you done this?
I've done it just by that, by looking at the shame, pulling back the shame and looking at what's there and owning
Beautiful.
it. I've participated in a lot of self-healing, of reparenting, shadow work, and so forth. And I've used many different methodologies to do so. But part of not wrapping this stuff in shame is presenting to your children as fallible creatures. We are people that have our internal worlds. Even though we've been on the planet longer than our children, we still have growth that we're
Beautiful.
participating in within ourselves. We're not done, we're flawed. And being okay being that person with our children is empowering. My son actually wrote the foreword to my book, and he talks about his recollection of the way that his friends view their parents. They put them on a pedestal. Their parents are to be, honored and feared, even, right? And I was never any of that for him. I created a collaborative relationship with him. And if I was deserving of being honored, not for the mere point that I gave birth to this child, but because I am being respectful back, then yes, this is a reciprocal thing. But just by virtue of being the parent doesn't make me somebody who can demand respect. I need to give respect in order to receive respect. And he's got to know that I am a person who is fallible. And that basically is what he talks about in the forward of my book.
So I think a lot of the things that you talk about is the work a parent has to do on themselves as
Yes.
they're also going about their own parenting. And like you said, it's taking it out of the shadows. It's going to that little creepy room in the attic that we might not want to go into, but it's important in order for us to continue our amazing work as parents for ourselves, and having to not just face the fears, but like work on it, process it, deal with it, and put it into a place where I'm okay. I'm able to now deal with this properly. I'm not hearing anything you say anything about like forgiving the past, or forgiving certain people that might have done certain things, but it's about my work that I have to do on myself. And I think that's the key over here. And just to throw in together with something you were saying and comment on it, is it's also showing our kids that, hey, I'm a human being too, and I've gone through things, and I am still working on things, and just because I'm older than you doesn't mean that I'm better than you, and I'm also your parent. So there's a certain balancing act that we have actually as parents many balancing acts that we have responsibility for. But I think even a child realizing that life is about that balancing act, life is about realizing that I'm not perfect and I need to work on myself, and it takes a lifetime of work. I think those are the keys for what we've been talking about over here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think on this notion of having a approach when we talk about the partnership that we have with our children, and I think this could apply in so many different situations, in so many different types of family dynamics, whether it's a single family home, or we're two parents or multiple kids. I'm curious how you see the difference in this approach, as opposed to, let's say, for how you created it, being you and your son, and how other people might want to think about using something like this in different types of family dynamics.
Yeah, I've worked with families of all different, makeups, the two parents, six kids. Uh,
Are there any differences as opposed to what you have with your son?
it's just managing what that pie looks like, whether or not you have a pie in our case and you split it in half, right? That's still equal, or
Yeah.
a pie and you split it into equal points, and each person has an eighth of the pie, it's still equal. And there are tools and exercises that I use to visually help each person own that part of the pie, and recognize how important the family unit is with each piece perfectly fitting.
Mm.
So, yes, it takes a little bit more work, but I will tell you from the example of creating the Project World School, and everything that we do is based on consensus. Can you imagine getting 15 teenagers to agree to one thing? It
Huh.
takes a lot of skill, listening time. It takes work. But when you explain that we all have a equal piece of the pie, even me who is facilitating the retreat, doesn't mean that I get two pieces and you guys all get one. It means that my one opinion is part of the whole, and it has no more weight or less weight than anybody else. And so if one person doesn't want to do the thing that we've all decided we want to do, we stop and we look and we listen and we discuss, we pull it apart until we can come to a consensus. A consensus can happen with 15 or 17 teenagers. If I can do that with that many teenagers, you can
Yeah.
do that with a family of four.
Sure, I 100% that makes sense to me. But one example that popped into my head is like, let's say you're doing a family trip, and everyone's getting back into the car. You have two, three kids, and the parents are in the car. The 4-year-old decides, no, I don't want to get in the car right now. So, are you saying that like we all don't go anywhere, or can a parent say, hey, this is what we need to do, let's get in the car now and let's talk about it as we're going? You're saying there's a different type of approach to how to go about that from this model. How would that work?
Well, I don't know what the circumstances are of
Obviously,
this
right?
example, but it is a hypothetical
Correct.
example. If you are committed, which in partnerships, you have to be committed all the time to being in partnership. Sometimes it looks like a consensus in some families. Sometimes it looks like a democratic process where one person's needs aren't met. and we negotiate and deal with that later. You have to define as a family the manner in which it works for the family.
Right.
Some families will say, the kids will say, you guys, I don't want to decide. Mom always gets the last word. Some families will say, you know what? We all want to be heard right now. And depending on what works for that family unit, that's what you've decided. And if you decide that, you need to keep negotiating this and asking, does this still work? Do we need to negotiate or massage the manner in which we make decisions? What is our goals as a family, and what values are we living by? If we're living by, everybody has, did I talk about core values yet? Because that is one of the most powerful tools that we use within our family culture. And it's a way of determining whether or not the decision is in alignment with the family values. We have our personal values, we have our collective values that we've all co-created. And if somebody says, look, guys, we're going to lose, $200 if we don't go now because our reservation will be given to somebody else and we've already put the money out. This is important to deal with. Are we okay moving forward and working this out as we go? And if somebody says no, then you've got a problem, and it's time to really address that. You can't force somebody to do the thing, because what's more important, the $200 or the relationship? And they both may be as important, but I would say that the relationship is always going to trump the idea of the external commitment.
Yeah, I understand that. I think as a parent of a few kids, I think there could be situations where I can say, well, because daddy said so. So right now we have to leave. Let's talk about it in the car, but it's raining. We're going to be late, and I don't want you splashing in the puddle and getting your muddy shoes in the car. So let's just get in the car now and we'll talk about it. And sometimes to have that, I don't want to call it authoritarian, but I guess you could say more of that parent role instead of that partnership role. Like you said, it really depends on the situation, and every parent has to know what the dynamics are of right there and then, know how they're feeling, knowing what the child is going through to sort of work through it properly. But I think it really depends on the approach. I think what it comes down to, and depending on what the approach is, whether it's a partnership approach or some other approach where there's also going to be healthy communication, it really comes down to communication. And that's really, really what it comes down to, of being able to open up those channels as best as possible so that we all are together in this. And that pie, like you're saying before, is going to be filled up. What the colors look like and whose shade is darker than others, it could change. It could change daily, and the percentage can change in those 8 different pieces in there. And knowing where that is and having the awareness from that, I think is really, really important. Are there things that, we've had a long conversation regarding what is a partnership approach to parenting is. Are there certain keys that we haven't talked about yet that you usually talk about in this approach that you think is important as we start getting towards the end of the podcast?
Well, yeah, I would really urge a deep dive into core values. It's probably one of the most powerful tools that a family can use. I would, as a family, cultivate a practice of connecting every week, every night, whatever works for your family. And some of the questions that,
like a weekly meeting type thing.
Mhm.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be as formal as that. But every night before
Right.
my son and I would go to bed, we would ask each other, we made it our fun sort of habit. What worked today? What didn't work today? And what do we need from tomorrow? Right. So that
Love
gave
that.
us the opportunity, again, not to point fingers or put blame, but this really worked when you did this thing. It really worked when, I got a smile from the guy handing me the taco. It really worked when blah, 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 blah. And it didn't work when you did that thing. For me, it didn't work. And that feels really different than you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
sure.
less of a blame thing. And that also cultivates a practice of communication that we're both accountable. I hear you. I understand. Oh, thanks for letting me know. I didn't know the way that I responded kind of triggers you. I didn't know that. It gives me information. I know this now. Thank you.
Yeah, the way I go about it, then I might have mentioned this before. When you're pointing the finger, saying you, I talk about
Yeah.
making a U-turn, bringing the finger
Yeah.
back to you. So you bring it in and you say, well, when that happened, when you were a little loud in the car, when I had a phone call to make, that was really difficult for me because you knew at 2 o'clock I had to find out about something. So that was really hard for me to deal with. Or when you didn't listen to me when that happened, that was really hard on me because it really messed with blank. So when you bring it in and you bring it back to you and you say, this is how I felt in that situation, first of all, I think what it does is it allows you to express things in a non-accusatory way. Secondly, what it does
Yes.
is if someone's having a feeling, and this applies to teenagers, children, parents, and grandparents, when someone has a feeling, that's not, that emotion can't be refuted. You can't say, oh, you can't have that, or that's not true. No, that's how I felt in that situation. So you want to tell me reasons why I shouldn't have been upset? We could talk that out, but I'm telling you I was angry. I'm telling you I was upset, or I didn't like that. Let's talk it out. But you can't say I didn't feel that because I know what I felt. And that's something that can be taken away from
Exactly.
me. So when you put it on yourself, then that's something that we could process out, whether we disagree or agree, or how we can make something that could dissipate in a healthy way that it's not going to affect us long term. But that's something that when you bring it in, you talk about the emotions of self, that's where we're able to go to have a place of healthy communication and healthy talking in that sense over here. And going back to the core values that you're talking about, can you talk about that for like a quick minute or two?
Sure. So, really determining what your core values are an amazing way to use it as a filter to see if decisions are in alignment. And what that means is you don't have to live with rules. You don't have to have rules in your family at all. You don't have, and let's talk about rules for a minute. I know most traditional or conventional parenting includes bedtimes and mealtime rules and,
Electronic
also
rules.
rules. Yeah, sure. Also, what about, personal
Right.
hygiene, right? There, some families, those are very, very important things to that family culture. Instead of it being a rule, we value hygiene, and that's very different. It may be the same
Mhm.
outcome, but the way that you're approaching it is about really connecting through a relationship, side by side, common goal. We have the value for personal hygiene. Therefore, we're going to be a family that brushes our teeth together. Instead of you go brush your teeth now. Why?
Right.
Because I said so. That's not relationship
Right.
building. That's about
Sure.
authoritarian
Or
parenting,
sometimes I
which
would call
I'm
laziness as well as a parent. And it might be something I'm guilty with as well sometimes. So just pointing it out there and, saying, yeah, I'm
we're
guilty of this
fallible.
100%.
Me too. I mean,
Right.
we're fallible.
That's a
And
big thing.
that's the beauty of it. And I just want to say
Sure.
one more thing to that, the accountability of our own internal worlds as a parent. As somebody who grew up with trauma, and part of my trigger is
Mm.
hyper control, right? Being controlled. A lot of people have that same response and get triggered when somebody tries to control them. But what we don't recognize is if we have this pattern, we have both sides of the coin. We have the I don't like being controlled, but I know it, so I'm going to be controlling because that's my
Yep.
hardwire, right? And even though I don't choose to act on that all that often, sometimes I do default to it because it is part of my hardwiring. I'm accountable for that wiring that I'm bringing to this relationship. And whether it's with a boyfriend or business partner or a friend or a child, right? Wife, husband, or a child, I'm still accountable for that. And one of the gifts that I gave to my son was the awareness of my internal worlds. Look, honey, I was really controlled. I had a lot of trauma growing up. I was yelled at a lot. And if I default to that in any situation, I'm telling you, I'm doing this subconsciously. It's my patterning. Please hold a mirror, a virtual mirror, hypothetical mirror up to me and say, you're being like your mother. And this is my gift to
Mm.
you. And he did use that 2 or 3 times in our life. And it always, because I gave him
Yeah.
the
Sure. But
awareness
also
of
the
my
permission to
internal
talk to you about it.
process. And he always permission to say that, and that always snapped me out of it. I became accountable for my actions instead of running on pre-programmed responses, and
Right.
that helped, right? So we were accountable for one another because he didn't want that
Beautiful. I'm gonna
behavior from me.
have to wrap this up for right now. We're gonna have to talk a lot more about this. I have 3 rapid fire questions for you as we end with everyone. If there was a book or an audiobook or maybe a documentary or a speaker that you would recommend to people to get more information, not just on the concept that we've been talking about today in the partnership parenting, but in general that you've learned from that you would recommend to others, what would that person or book be?
Well, first and foremost, you got to go out and get my book
Yes,
because
yes.
all the stuff that we're talking about,
And we will post a link in the show description for
I
Liani's
appreciate
book.
that. Thank you. If you are a parent of a teen and really want to understand the neurobiology, the biology, and the psychology, I highly recommend Brainstorm: The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain by Dr. Daniel Siegel. I think that's a wonderful
Hmm.
book, and I love all of his books on attachment.
Yes, and
Yeah,
his workbooks as well.
yeah,
Highly recommended.
totally. I love that. In
Okay.
my book, I've got a recommended book, a book list about 10 pages long, and it goes from attachment to childhood trauma to unschooling to education to
Mm.
nonviolent communication. We talk, there's also a reference for a great book on childism. So, any of the areas that you're interested in, there's a massive, like I said, 10 pages is a lot of books.
Amazing.
I've read so many books. Yeah,
Okay.
there you go.
If there would be a mundane superpower that you can have to help with your parenting, what would that be?
You know what it would be, and this is not very mundane. I would love the superpower to touch anything and just like a little dink, dink, and access my power of love and joy. And sometimes you need the external reminder that I can get it from any situation. And
Hmm.
sometimes when I look at my child and I'm frustrated, I just need to go, dink. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That puts me back into the space where I can actually feel the emotions anchored in love and joy. And that will change my perspective of any situation.
Hmm. Is there a person that you can think of, whether it was a teacher, mentor, or someone in your life
Mm.
that you can remember, and maybe like a 1 or 2 sentence attached to that that you can attribute where you are today as a parent?
Who inspired me to parent this way? Well, I, this is going to sound really crazy, but my mother, she inspired me. How
That shows so much work that you've done that you can say that. But I'll let you speak for 1 or 2 sentences here.
it's so hard. I mean, I have, oh, I've got anger, I've got frustration, and I've got the belief that I deserve to be parented differently. But that gave me strength, and that gave me the inspiration to be a self directed learner and to be fiercely connected to my own ability to learn and my ability to be attached to other human beings because I
Hmm.
really had to work hard because I had a
Beautiful.
disorganized attachment style. And my mother gave me that gift. I wouldn't be me without that. I love her for
Beautiful.
that.
Beautiful. It
Yeah.
has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for teaching us stuff that I don't think that many of us have ever thought about before. So this was
Yeah.
an absolute pleasure, and we will post some show notes in the description below for any way for people to contact you. Are there any places that you want to share on social media or a website that people can find you?
Sure. My website, the work that I do with teens, you can find me at Transformative Mentoring for Teens. And my first name is Lainie. It's spelled Laini. And I always put a little I in front of it. So it's Lainie. You can find me on what was known as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, also LinkedIn through Lainie.
Beautiful. Thank
Yeah,
you so much for joining us today.
my pleasure.